After that glowing introduction, I thought I would be much taller. No, I'm delighted to have a chance to talk with you today about speech communication or communication studies. It goes by many names, communication arts and sciences. I'll probably use those terms interchangeably today. Let me begin by saying, can you hear me in the back? Okay. Let me begin by saying that you are in very good hands here at Fullerton Community College. The faculty in speech communication know their stuff. They are dedicated to students and teaching. And no matter where else you went for the first 2 years of college, you would not get a better introduction to the discipline of speech communication than here. And if you ever decide to transfer as a speech communication or communication studies major, we would love to have you drive down the road a bit to Cal State Fullerton. I'm hoping that what I can do is sell you on the idea of considering communication studies, speech communications as a major. Speakers always preview their points. So first I'm going to explain what speech communication or communication studies is. Next I'm going to discuss why you should consider majoring in the field. And lastly, I'm going to talk about some of the career opportunities there. So what is communication studies or speech communication? If it'll work, we can watch this video clip in which Ashton Kutcher on 2.5 Men asked the same question.
Weird way.
There's nothing weird about 3 people having dinner together.
It is when 2 of them are on a date.
We want you here. Is that right, Stacey?
Uh-huh. Yeah, totes. In that case, I'm totes glad to be here.
So are you into photography too?
Yeah. I take tons of selfies. Instagram.
So how did you 2 wind up living together?
She's my grandma. Stacy's looking for a job out here. She just graduated from Arizona State.
Oh, wow. What was your major?
Communications.
You know, I've always wondered, what is that exactly?
Well, it's, I don't know, depends on words. Like talking and stuff. 120 grand.
Okay, so I like that clip for a number of reasons. First, it makes fun of Arizona State University. And second, like many other people, Ashton Kutcher just isn't sure what communications is. So that's what we're going to talk about. So first, some misconceptions about communication studies. Some people, this used to happen quite a bit when I would tell someone I was in speech communication, they would think that I was an expert in voice and diction. So they would start watching their pronunciation very carefully. And pronunciation does matter. Honey Boo Boo's family could certainly benefit from some articulation therapy. But elocution is just a small part of what people in communication studies cover. Another notion is that if you're in communication studies, you're going to use a lot of ornate, flowery language. So someone might say, Betty offered a negative insight into Timmy's physiognomy. They just mean Betty said Timmy's ugly. But eloquence matters, which is the clarity and force with which you communicate your ideas, but verbosity, which is just using big words when littler words were used, is not part of speech communication. And then the last sort of notion is that you would major in speech communication because you're going to give a lot of public speeches. That's also somewhat mistaken. You do give presentations at the communications major, but there aren't that many occasions in real life when you're just going to break into a speech. You know, maybe a toast at a wedding, maybe a farewell speech at a retirement party, maybe a funeral eulogy. But there aren't that many formal special occasion speeches that people give. The more common kinds of talk that people do nowadays would be elevator pitch, or just a very brief presentation to a boardroom or a smaller group. So people communicate a lot, but they don't do as much one-to-many communication as they used to. So what is communication, or communication studies, or speech communication? It's really an attempt to understand how people use symbols to create meaning, and how they try and share the meanings of those symbols. And by symbols, I mean a lot of things, not just words, which are symbolic, but there's symbolic action too. So a protest march would be symbolic as well. So how they exchange those messages and symbols, and also how effective or ineffective they are. There's a lot of miscommunication that occurs. So the academic purpose of the field is to understand this symbol sharing process, when it works well and how it goes wrong. And the more practical goal is to increase communication competence. Communication competence involves two subsets. One is communicating effectively, getting your point across, persuading people, that sort of thing. But the other thing is communicating appropriately, so you don't seem like a jerk, so you're not ethnocentric, so people don't hate you. And so both of those things together, communicating effectively and appropriately, constitute communication competence, which is pretty much the goal of the communication studies major. It's also a highly flexible major. So communication includes a lot of things. Interpersonal communication is one of the areas. I imagine you have a course on that here. Family communication. Online interaction. We just hired a new faculty member in the area of social media and communication. Small groups and decision making, problem solving is part of communication. Anything in a room, boardroom, courtroom, classroom, city council meeting, all those kinds of things are communication. Retail sales, food server transactions with customers, quite a bit of research on how to increase tips. There's research on physicians and how they interact with patients to get them to comply. One of the most difficult things to do is for a physician to get a patient to comply with a physician's request. And you'd think the patient would want to comply because it's in their interests. You know, if someone has high blood pressure and the physician says, don't eat so much salt, it doesn't affect the physician if they comply, it affects the patient. But 70 to 80% of patients don't do what their doctor tells them to do. I was having a conversation with family members one time, and I said, you know, I always did exactly what the doctor said, and they would go, well, why would you do that? It's like, I guess there's a game where you try and fool the doctor or something. So one person said, well, if I'm going in, they're going to check my blood pressure, I make sure I'm dehydrated, so I guess that lowers blood pressure. Somebody else said, well, I put my arms over my head for about 5 or 10 minutes, and that lowers, I guess, the blood pressure. I'm not sure why you'd want to mislead the doctor about the blood pressure, but it's very common. And I can see why, you know, some things are very difficult. If you're obese and diabetic and you have to lose 100 pounds, that's hard to do. So yeah, that's hard to comply. Quitting smoking. But what about things just like calcium supplements? Most women over 50 are at risk of osteoporosis. You know, that's lack of bone density where your grandmother keeps getting smaller and smaller. How hard is it to take a calcium supplement? But people still don't do it. So all these things are part of communication studies. When coaches talk to players, which doesn't happen much on the Lakers, but that's still part of communication. So why major in this? So there's a couple reasons. Let's see if I can roam around with this thing. Can you hear this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there are a couple of reasons why you might want to major in this topic. One of the misnomers people often have is that communication skills are innate, you know, that you're born and soon after you learn how to talk, so why would you need to study that kind of stuff? But it's like a lot of other skills that are innate. Most normal, able-bodied people can walk or run and breathe. But if you wanted to run in a marathon, you'd have to do practice. You'd have to have training for that. If you wanted to breathe in the swimming portion of a triathlon, you'd have to have special breathing techniques. If you wanted to be in a bicycle race, you'd have to learn how to be aerodynamic. So whatever your natural level of skill is, you can improve upon that considerably. And we see that in the forensics program where in a semester or two, people can get much, much better at public speaking, at arguing, debating, those kinds of things. Here's an example. Everybody naturally has a certain amount of communication apprehension. Any of you folks think you might be nervous if you had to get up and speak before a group? Yeah, so that's natural. In fact, 76% of college professors reported that they were very nervous when they went off to meet a class for the first time. Because you folks are scary. But you can overcome communication apprehension. In fact, you can channel it constructively so that you still have the nervous energy, some of those butterflies, but you're using them to help the communication. So you can channel the nervous energy into enthusiasm, for example. Another example is charisma. Some people think, well, you're a natural-born leader, or you're not, and you can't improve charisma. But some recent studies show that just by teaching simple things, there are a dozen techniques they talk about, corporate executives who are able to increase by 60% their employees' perceptions of their credibility. So a lot of these things are teachable, and a lot of these things are learnable. It's not that you're born with a certain level of communication skill, and that's all you can have. Also, communication technology has shrunk our world. So you folks are known as the always-on generation, millennials. Some of you are checking your texts right now, tweeting, updating Facebook. Do any of you have policies on that in class?
Oh yeah. They're usually ignored.
Yeah. I'm too lazy to figure it out, but I know if someone's looking down at their lap and laughing, that it's probably not because I just told a good joke during my lecture. Yeah, so we have much more access to other people. They have access to us, whether it's through social media or other channels. More and more careers now depend on talk. Bloggers, people who tweet things. Lots and lots of occupations involve talking for a living. Businesses rely increasingly on word-of-mouth marketing or viral marketing. Word of mouse instead of word of mouth is commonly used now. Instead of repeat business, they often refer to retweet business. So all these occupations, especially the people professions, are much more involved with communication now. And hashtag activism. You don't have to go all the way down to a protest march now. You can just type something in and tweet away. Much easier, right? So these are all examples of how much more we rely on communication. In fact, we're all kind of surprised, like this Malaysian airliner disappeared, and people can't fathom, how could it be that something would go away without sending 20,000 communication messages first? There could have been a transponder, there could have been radio contact with the tower, there's all the cell phones of the passengers. It seems almost unbelievable to us that something could happen where there wasn't a lot of communication. Maybe they'll sort that out soon. So communication skills are essential in a lot of ways, partly in the workplace or the career, partly in interpersonal relationships. I don't know if I've shared this with your faculty or not, but I have what I refer to as the interpersonal curse. This is just my own anecdotal evidence, but in our field or discipline, communication studies, it seems like the people who are in argumentation and debate have very long-lasting relationships. And the people who are interpersonal, not so long. I haven't taken a straw poll or anything, it just seems that way from the people I know in these different fields. In addition to interpersonal relationships, which might be friendships, family members, those kinds of things, there's also civic engagement. Part of the goal of becoming an adult, moving out into the real world, is to become civically engaged or actively involved in your community. One day you might want to attend a town hall meeting or a city council meeting, or maybe some meeting on campus somewhere because you're upset about something, tuition increases or parking tickets or something like that. Cultural awareness is important. So Southern California, I'm not sure what the metaphor is now, salad bowl, melting pot, upside down cake, something. It's very culturally diverse. So it's good to know what cultural expectations operate in different circumstances and situations. As an example of interpersonal relationships, families are increasingly becoming single-parent families or blended families. So there are lots more cases now where maybe we knew about how siblings got along with each other, but those were biological siblings. And now communication researchers will be studying step-siblings and step-parent communication. So communication between a biological father and biological daughter may be very different than communication between a biological father and a stepdaughter or stepson, stepmother, those kinds of things. So a lot of this is new and being studied. And lastly, there's this defensive function. Other people who are good at communication are trying to convince you to do things, buy things, like things, retweet things. It's important as a consumer of these information messages to know if you're being hoodwinked or not. There are lots of charlatans out there and grifters. And so it's important to know what links you shouldn't click on. Any of you fallen for the Nigerian prince? You know, every month there's a new scam that someone's trying to do online. But if you study communication, you can learn what kinds of ways people are vulnerable. Quite often we use mental shortcuts. We're cognitively lazy, so we don't think about things like we should, but that's what the people are counting on who want to take advantage of us. Study of communication is also interesting. This is what I like most about it. There are lots of fascinating things about how people communicate, how they perceive messages, how they respond to messages. Perhaps you know that in Fullerton recently, there was an incident where the police officers beat up this mentally ill homeless guy who died, and there was a trial, and the police officers were acquitted, but they're no longer on the Fullerton police force. But one part of communication would be how police officers interact with people who have some sort of mental illness. That seems like something good for the city of Fullerton to do. One part of communication is nonverbal communication. One part of nonverbal communication is called artifacts, which includes clothing, jewelry, body art, those kinds of things. And one part of artifacts in clothing is the color of clothing. There are studies that show that when police officers wear black uniforms, they're perceived as more threatening and having more authority, which is good if that's what you want to do, threaten people and show them you're an authority figure. But police officers who wear blue uniforms, like in Chicago, or tan uniforms, like the CHP, are perceived as more friendly and approachable. So if you had a problem, you might be more likely to go to the police officer wearing a tan uniform than a black uniform. And that's just one aspect of the way color, as a nonverbal cue, influences behavior. There's also something called the red pen effect involving color. I don't know if you've gotten a paperback lately that was all marked up, but when instructors grade papers using a red pen, they mark more errors on the paper than if you just give them a purple or a green pen. And when students get a paper back and all the comments are in red, they perceive them as more negative than if they're written in another color. So these are pretty simple things that instructors can change, but they have to know that they're part of the communication process. Another example of communication being interesting is the idea of social proof, when one person models behavior for another person. So an example would be when my kids were little, they would be in the car seat, and I didn't realize this, but apparently when other motorists would do something wrong, I would hurl epithets at them. And so some of the first words my daughter learned were pretty choice language. I wasn't trying to persuade her to use these terms, she just picked up on them. But there are lots of cases where social modeling or social proof like this occurs. In one study, they found that when women were in a cafeteria line, if the person in front of them ordered a dessert, put it on their tray, the women were much more likely to get a dessert themselves. If the person in front of them didn't get a dessert, then they were much less likely to get a dessert. I don't think they consciously realized that they were following the other person's lead. So lots of cases where social proof operates this way. That's one of the reasons why we have these moving rating systems. Studies show that if adolescents see a lot of smoking on TV or at the movies, they are much more likely to take up smoking. And it's hard to find a lot of TV and movies without smoking. Mad Men, for example. So these are lots of interesting aspects of communication. They're not just somebody giving an oration to a large audience like the Gettysburg Address. Those things are important too. But there's a lot of interpersonal communication, a lot of nonverbal communication, a lot of subtle communication that's worth learning about. So let's talk about career opportunities. This 2008 study was a review of literature, and there are more than 50 published studies that say it's a good thing to have communication skills in the workplace. In fact, when they survey people 5 years out of college, 10 years out of college, and so on, your GPA in college predicts very little about your on-the-job performance later in life. As an example, George W. Bush was a C student in college, became president of the United States. What's most predictive of on-the-job performance later in life is your communication skills. So quite a few studies show that skill in communication, all kinds of communication, presentation skills, interpersonal skills, working in teams and groups are extremely important. The ability to communicate ranked first among personal qualities of college grads sought by employers. And there are dozens and dozens of these kinds of studies. When I say communication skills, the three things employers say that they want most out of college grads, that the college grads are lacking in, is oral communication skills, all kinds, interpersonal, small group, these big skills. Writing skills, they want people who can write a memo that's grammatical, or write a report that's organized and makes sense with proof. And the last thing is critical thinking skills. And you'll get all of those things in a communication studies major. These are just some of the possible job types. Now, if you were an accounting major, then when you graduated, you'd look for a job called accountant. And for some communication careers, that's true too. If you would go into advertising, you'll look for an advertising firm. If you went into public relations, you'd look for a public relations firm. But for a lot of jobs in the field of communication studies, there's not a one-to-one correspondence between the name of the degree, communication studies, and the actual name of a job you would get. But these are some of the common jobs. Some of them, like a legal career, require more education, of course. You have to go to law school. We just hired a person to do health communication in our department because folks my age, we're getting older, the baby boomers. We have health care coverage and we want to use it. So there are a lot more people who are insured now, and health communication is very important. It used to be that the health care provider, let's say Kaiser, would have someone whose job was just to deny you coverage for something. So you would come in and say, my leg hurts, and they would go, oh, too bad that's not covered. And you would say, well, my elbow hurts too, and they would go, well, that's a pre-existing condition. But now, They have a lot of people who serve as health advocates for consumers. So there's much more communication between patients and healthcare organizations. So that's one big area of growth in our field. I mentioned social media earlier, that we had hired a person in that area. Almost any job that used to exist somewhere in a brick and mortar place now exists online, and of course many more jobs that didn't exist before. Didn't Facebook just turn 10 or something like that?
Not quite.
Not quite. And MySpace, I don't know. Except for your grandmother, does anyone have MySpace? You do. Hey, you are rocking it old school.
I just haven't got around to it.
And lots of younger folks have already abandoned Facebook, and you're on Instagram or whatever those things are. Foursquare. All right. I would say, if an employer asks you, why should I hire you because you have good communication skills, you should respond by saying, why would you hire anyone who didn't have good communication skills? I can't think of a career where to move up in that particular profession, you wouldn't need good communication skills. Is there one? Dog walker? Maybe. But you still have to communicate well with the owners of the dogs. Bank robber? You have to convince those tellers that you're serious. You have to persuade your wheelman not to drive away if the alarm goes off. Most careers, if you want to move beyond a MIC job and move up in the organizational hierarchy, you're going to have to be good at communication. And not just oral or spoken communication, but writing too. My advice would be take all the writing classes you can. You can never get too good at writing. No one ever turns in a report to the boss, and the boss goes, this is just too well written. Let's put some stupid wording in here. And a lot of these may not seem like obvious careers, but lobbyists. There are lobbyists all over the place. They're in Washington, D.C. on K Street. They're in Sacramento. Lots and lots of places have lobbyists. I am a consultant for some of those groups. I do consulting for the California Dairy Association, the California Association of Realtors. They want me to tell them how to frame their message so that milk drinkers like milk. Or Asians will get the lucky address they're looking for when they buy a home. So lots and lots of people are in lobbying jobs, although they may not call it that. They might work for something called the California Business Association that facilitates small business interaction with Sacramento, but they're still doing those kinds of jobs. So, not to rag on any particular degrees, but just to point out, this is data from Forbes, which was also collected through Georgetown University. It looked at the best jobs to have, the worst jobs to have, or the worst college majors to have. Now, if you want a really good job where you are guaranteed that when you walk across the stage at commencement, you will have a job, you got to go into petroleum engineering, biochemistry, especially cell biology and cloning. These are mostly hard science careers. Physics pays pretty well. Those kinds of jobs, you start at $110,000 a year. Pretty good. But not everyone's good at physics or chemistry. So these are the jobs that have the highest unemployment and pay the worst when you graduate from college. The good news for you folks is you're at a community college, which is relatively cheap. Try the Claremont colleges where it's $50,000 a year, or Chapman College where it's about $40,000 a year. I actually heard a guy, he graduated from Dartmouth, he owed $120,000 in student loans, and his major was puppetry.
Oh.
You've got to have a lot of puppet shows to pay off $120,000. And I'm not making fun of that. I'm sure there are important jobs in the puppet industry, but that's a lot of college debt to rack up. So some of these, anthropology, unemployment rate at 10.5, photographic arts 12.9, fine arts. I started off as a philosophy major myself before switching so I can make fun of some of these. But any of you know what the difference is between a philosophy major and a 15-inch pizza? 15-inch pizza can feed a family of 4. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. What did the anthropologist say to the business major? Do you want fries with that? I'm being harsh, I know. I'm just saying, more and more people are looking at majors and looking at what's called ROI, return on investment. Is it worth getting a college degree in that field? Meaning there will be a job when you're done. Now, if you don't care about a job, that's fine. Maybe you just want to get better at communicating so you can get along with your friends and family. But most people are in college hoping it will lead to some kind of career. So these are the 10 worst ones. To show you where communication is, 6.3% unemployment. Not amazing, but much better. And the starting salary is about $50,000. The others, the bad ones, were kind of around $30,000 or so. Now this depends a lot on what field of communication you go into. Again, it's not like accounting where there's a corresponding job. So this includes advertising, public relations. It includes entertainment studies, which would be running amusement parks, event planning, lots and lots of careers. But that's a pretty good average compared to some of the others. And if you really love philosophy, you know, you can be a double major. You could have one that will be your day job, and then by evening you could be a philosopher. This is a pretty recent study, 2014. They surveyed over 300 CEOs, and they asked them to recall the last promotion they made. These are people who are already working at the company. So they asked them the top 20 reasons. You know, why did you promote that person instead of that person? So I've just listed the top 10 here, but the first one is, has excelled in current position. Then leadership potential, job-related skills. Fourth was strong interpersonal skills. This goes back to what I'm saying. It's not just giving public speeches. Interpersonal skills are very important. And eighth on the list is oral communication skills. So of the top 10 things that factored into promotion decisions among these CEOs, 2 of them are directly related to communication studies. And some of the others, like leadership skills, are also related to communication. So my point would be that communication is extremely valuable. And even if you're going to pursue some other career, maybe you're going to go into marketing in a business college, or maybe you're going to go into biology in a natural science college, it's still worth having a communication degree or a communication minor. Communication minor, which we offer at Cal State Fullerton, we call the minor for all majors, because there isn't any major that doesn't benefit from better communication skills. What questions might you folks have? And I have a human communication studies pencil for anyone who asks. Yes?
How can the communication studies degree help with like international speaking if you were working for a business that had to speak to or speak in other countries and stuff like that, whether it's like different language barriers or stuff like that?
Excellent question. It helps in a couple ways. First of all, part of our field is intercultural communication. So understanding cultural sensitivities would be part of that. If you are going to speak to some Japanese business people, one of the first things you'd need to know is that they're not big on shaking hands. Usually you just exchange business cards. That's an important part of the ritual. So from the get-go, you would need to be immersed in their cultural traditions, what's considered rude, what's considered polite, and so on. And the other thing I mentioned, which has to do with return on investment, if you're an English speaker, a native English speaker, studies show there's not much advantage in you learning a second or a third foreign language. You can, if you want to travel and things like that. But the advantage in you learning a foreign language is for non-English speakers who use English. So if you're doing international presentations, it's probably going to be in English unless it's in a very specific country. if you were giving a presentation in Germany, Holland, those kinds of places, it would probably be in English. I attend an argumentation conference in the Netherlands in the summer, and everything is in English there. But the most important thing would be the cultural sensitivity that you would get in intercultural communication classes. Yes, sir.
Sounds like communication as a minor is definitely a good idea, but how deep does that education go compared to communication as a major?
Not as deep. It's 18 units on our campus. The major is 42 units, but you can tailor it. So of those 6 courses you take, they could be concentrated specifically where you want them. If someone wanted to go into law, for example, they could do debate, they could do argumentation, advanced argumentation, persuasion, legal communication. So those 18 units could be made up of classes mostly in that area. If somebody wanted to go into business, then they could take public relations, advertising, persuasion again, maybe the social media class. So it's not as in-depth, but you can also tailor the minor to fit your particular career path. What else? Yes?
What courses would you recommend here and over at Cal State to prepare one into the major or the minor?
I don't know all of their curriculum, but I'm sure they have interpersonal, small group communication, argumentation, and maybe not in their department, but all the writing courses you could take. A lot of people go into communication studies and they think, oh, I just like to talk, I have a gift for gab, I don't want to write. You're going to write a lot in communication studies. They're going to be pretty rigorous about writing standards, research, scholarly citations, and things like that. So you won't avoid writing by going into communications. But they have a pretty thorough curriculum here for the first 2 years. What else is offered?
Well, we have the argumentation class and forensics, of course.
Forensics, intercollegiate speech and debate.
I think the two you meant, intercultural and public speaking.
Intercultural and
We
public.
have mainly the 5 plus forensics.
And so for your first 2 years, that's a pretty good lineup of courses. You want to get a general overview of the field before you would specialize. And when you transfer, whether it's here, Long Beach, San Diego State, or one of the UCs, some have more specialized curriculum than others. So we have a lot of argumentation and persuasion, a lot of organizational communication. At Long Beach, they have a lot of instructional communication. San Diego State has more interpersonal communication. But that would be once you're done. We have scholarships at Cal State Fullerton. And after you finish a BA degree in communication studies, you can get an MA degree and be a teaching fellow in our department. We have about 15 to 20 graduate students who are teaching fellows that actually teach a class on their own. Doug Cressy was one of those people years ago, just after language had been invented. And Jack Myrop was a teaching fellow at one time. So yeah, it's a very good experience and opportunity. If you think you want to go into teaching, that's certainly one of the things you can do with a communication studies degree. You can teach high school speech and debate, or at a community college, or 4 years. Anything else you'd like to know? Yes.
At Cal State Fullerton, is there like a general communications degree, or is it split up into like interpersonal and like journalism? Because I know a lot of the other colleges split it all up.
So Richard Kirkham explained this confusion. We're in a college of communications with an S. And in that college, there's 3 departments. So my department's called Human Communication Studies. And people always go, oh, so you're not doing animal or plant communication. We go, ha, 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 that's right. No purposes and terms. In our department, Human Communication Studies, we have 2 degree programs. One is called Communication Studies, which is most of what I've been talking about. Another one is communicative disorders, so that might be someone with language delay, stuttering, aphasia, which is when you get hit on the head and can't talk anymore, this kind of things. And there's another department called Radio, TV, and Film, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It includes photography. And then the 3rd department has the same name as the college, communications. And it includes advertising, public relations, journalism, although there might only be 1 or 2 papers left in the country at this point. Entertainment studies, and there may be one I'm leaving out. So within the College of Communication, there are different degree programs. In our department, whether you emphasized interpersonal, intercultural, organizational, the degree would say communication studies. So you can have a specialty, or you can just call it a generic degree, but the diploma says the same thing. The transcripts is where it would show you the emphasis that's interpersonal or organizational, intercultural, those kinds of things. And every other university may have some different scheme or layout. There aren't that many that have a college of communication, usually a department. Yes? Yeah, so we have a new faculty member, Summer Martin, who teaches health communication. So we have one 400 level course, 425 health communication. There's a graduate level course on public health awareness messages, sort of mass media campaigns. And we'll have another course or 2 within the next few years. So in addition to our courses, there are courses in nursing and gerontology that also help with health communication. So that particular area is sort of interdisciplinary in nature. Oh, and not to pander, but if this isn't a draw, I don't know what is. We just offered a new course this semester called Sex Communication. It filled up immediately. Every time we talk about the department meeting, we can't stop making jokes. What's the lab course like? Not too many with environmental studies, other than, say, argumentation, where that might be the topic that you're arguing about or debating about. Not so much in environmental studies. We do have these freshman pathways, so freshmen can pick globalization, sustainability, politics and power, nutrition, those kinds of things. If you pick either sustainability or globalization, then a lot of your courses could be about that theme or topic. So 2 of our courses, the public speaking class and beginning argument, we do have a pathway version of those for globalization and sustainability. The whole course is not about that. Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel that just doing communications as just like one thing, not actually saying, okay, I'm going to do a branch of it, is not kind of singling you out from the rest? Because I'm finding a lot of my friends and so forth that just did like a regular, communication major, and then they went out in their job force, and they're coming back saying they have to go back to school because it's too broad.
It does depend what area you go into. So if you went into advertising or public relations, they would have all the units in that area. But some of the others are broad, so you might want to specialize. But I think communication departments are targeting their curriculum now toward where the jobs are. So social media is one of those areas. Health communication is one of those areas. We have a new area which is Hispanic communication that includes a credential program. So I think some of the curriculum's going in the direction of where the jobs are, but some of it is also just finding what your strengths are or what you want to do and taking courses that align with those objectives. And it's always good to take other coursework too. At Fullerton, you have to have 120 units to graduate. 42 of those are communication studies. So you could take lots of other courses in business. There's an entrepreneurial business program there. You could take courses in any other department too. You can minor or double major in other departments as well. Yes?
So if you want to go to like human resources workforce, what area would you recommend?
Probably organizational communication. So a lot of people in organization go into training and development or human resources. Training and development would be where you're training the new employees either on interpersonal skills or not to sexually harass each other or to display intercultural sensitivity. As a chair, I have to attend these workshops once a week, and every week is a different scenario where they tell you things that seem pretty obvious, but apparently not that obvious because we've already been sued about it once at Cal State Fullerton. So a lot of that is the training and development. And then the human resources people sometimes are in charge of personnel screening, interviewing, job selection, those kinds of things. So sometimes they overlap, sometimes not. And some of the training and development is also international in nature. So we have some of our grads who train foreign people who are coming to the US to work. So maybe they know their job. They're an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer. They really know what they're doing there. But they don't know much about communication in America and interpersonal communication, those kinds of things. So the trainers have to train them what we do. Like here on a freeway, you can commit any egregious act you want as long as you go like this. So you don't do that, someone's going to shoot you. So a new person might not realize there's these etiquette rules for freeway driving and things. Some of them have to do with the workplace etiquette, some of them have to do just with adapting to a Western culture, things like that. So some folks do that as well. And some folks work for various headhunter firms, either for employers that are going abroad to work or employees who are coming from abroad to work here. Yes, sir.
What do you do to prepare for a speech? And do you feel nervous when you do one?
Sure, all the time. Wearing 2 pairs of underwear today. Yeah. It's natural to feel nervous, and so you kind of use that. Like, I try and make sure that I prepare so that I'm not winging it, and if I've rehearsed what I want to say and have a pretty good idea of what I want to say, then I'm less nervous about that. But you should be nervous. It'd be like any other performance you're doing. If you're going to do a high jump or something like that, you'd probably be nervous beforehand. So the trick is to channel that nervous energy constructively. I know sometimes people will say, well, if you're going to give a public speech, first drink 2 fingers of scotch, and then stare at an imaginary spot at the back of the room, and then imagine your audience is naked or something like that. I've never understood any of that advice. I don't know about you, but speaking to a naked audience would make me much more nervous than a clothed audience.
I always
So,
remind my students that I'm in the audience, and that's not going to make them feel
that's
bad.
right. Yeah, some sights you can't unsee. And there are lots and lots of skills that you can learn. You know, there's a whole field on communication apprehension and how to reduce anxiety, not only for public speaking, but small groups and interpersonal and those kinds of things too. So there are lots and lots of training and skills you can develop to reduce nervousness. But the main thing is just developing practice at something. If you do something over and over again, you get pretty good at it. There's one theory that you have to do something 10,000 times, and then you're an expert at it. So if you see somebody who's playing a Mozart concerto on a piano on a stage, that's not the first time they saw that sheet music. They have the sheet music and they're looking at it, but they have played that piece over and over again. When people give sales presentations, you can tell if it's a bad one because they're stammering and lurching, and you can tell they're looking for things to remember. Like when I have little kids who come to my door and they're selling peanut brittle for their soccer or something like that. They have this little canned speech, and I'm mean, so I like to interrupt them, and then they have to back up a few sentences and start all over. But I do buy their still. A lot of those things are just rehearsal. So the art of communicating well actually lies in concealing the art, so that it just seems spontaneous and natural, even though a lot of work has gone into it. A really good salesperson will just make you feel at ease, friendly, likable. You won't be consciously aware of all the strategies and techniques they're using. Same with politicians. Some of them seem pretty wooden and stiff. Some of them seem pretty natural, easygoing. Anything else? Do we have any more pencils?
You have 3 more questions you can ask us. We have time for 3 more questions.
By the way, these are lucky pencils. When I was in college as an undergraduate, I had a lucky pencil. was lucky because I took an engineering test and did well on it with this pencil. So then I saved it for all my tests. By my senior year, it was getting pretty small. So when I took a test, I would take the test with another pencil, but when I got to the hard questions, I would whip out the lucky pencil. And in argumentation, which you can study, that's called the post hoc fallacy, assuming a cause-effect relationship when something's purely coincidental. But I'm just going to take a chance. I'm not using the lucky pencil on a tough test. All right, well, thank you for attending. I think there's more cookies if you want them. And as I said, we have very good faculty.
I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just gonna delete it. I don't think they realize that we're not paying attention. We're sitting here. We're not like Vanessa from texting me.
Yeah, our phone fucking went off right before I was
You didn't hear it? You didn't hear me yell at
What did you get out of this? New document that you took, that you listened. Just a page.
Just a page.
Nothing crazy.
Just a page of how communication is going to change my life.
Yes. You're going to join the speech and debate team at Cal State Florida.
That's probably a lot of fun.
Just get here or were you already here? I got here. Write it up, type it up, give me one page. I was here. Here's what I learned. That's all I need. Thank you, sir. I was done. Hello. You take 3 pencils off. Thank you very much for coming.